I'm Christina. I'm the founder of Lane Uprising. I want to thank everybody for coming in, and then also just to Hack Night for hosting tonight's event, but also just keeping this going for so long. If you don't know much about Hack Night, definitely dig into their archive of presentations. Some of the most influential projects and just people in Chicago have passed through these doors. Maybe not these specific ones, but they've changed locations. So really, really awesome platform. I've met some awesome people from being here, and yeah, I'm just happy to share what we got going on. I'm going to, all right, real quick. Who here doesn't know what Lane Uprising is? Okay. And then who here knows what Lane Uprising is? Okay. Who here reports bike lane obstructions? Okay. Who here is a Lane Uprising volunteer? Can we get a round of applause? And there's a subset of our volunteers that actually helped work on a lot of the presentation and just the data audit of what you're going to see tonight. And do you want to stand up and introduce yourselves and tell people who you are?
Right. I'm Kelley. I have been volunteering with Lane Uprising since 2022 on the Uprise project. I'm a data engineer, work at Northwestern University, and went to U Chicago for my master's in computational analysis of public health.
Hi everyone, I'm Chris Baggott. I'm a digital product and user experience designer. Got my master's at Northwestern. I've been working in tech consulting, healthcare, and the public sector, doing design work for about 5 years. I've also been volunteering with Uprise for about 1.5 years. So yeah, really excited to kind of bring our data center training to these companies.
And I'm Alex. Been volunteering for like 1 year. I'm a data analyst.
So what you'll see is there's Lane Uprising, and then there's Uprise. These folks are more on the Uprise portion of things. So cool. Is there a clicker?
You can talk.
Okay. Just like okay. All right. So tonight's kind of just housekeeping. I will give you a recap of what we've done since the last time we presented here, which was 1.5 years ago, I want to say. And we'll give you a little bit of a 101 on Lane Uprising for folks that are unfamiliar with who we are and what we do. We'll also give you a little bit of a 101 on our sister site Uprise that we've been working on. And then we're going to do the actual presentation of the data audit to really get into sharing what we've been finding as far as like bicyclists, crashes with carriers that are located within the state of Illinois, physically located and registered with the United States Department of Transportation, and just like what their connections are. And then we'll also, kind of talk about what we have on deck for next projects. So since we've been here last, it was only 1.5 years ago, but we turned 8, which is crazy. Our database has more than doubled in 2 years, which is even more crazy. So we're definitely in a growth space right now. And with that, this year we've set an all-time record high for the amount of data that we've collected, and we're about twice the amount of data that we collected in 2023. So we're growing fast right now. We recently have done quite a bit of tech updates to make it more enticing to submit to the database, glean insights from the database, and so the data that we are, getting right now, it's only going to be increasing. Since the last time, as far as the actual development that we've done, we rebuilt our entire tech stack. Raise your hand if you were involved in that. Give this man a round of applause because that was not a fun summer. One thing that you should know is bicyclists really like being outdoors when the weather's nice, and we were all behind laptops like the entire summer. It was not fun. We have released 5 app updates since the last time we presented. We've also just made the user experience a lot easier, so making it easier to submit. a lot of autofill for date, time, location. When you upload a photo, we'll extract information from that photo automatically. So it'll also pull like license plate state and license plate number. And then we built the training course that we talked about last time, and we've continued quite a bit of development on Uprise. So with that, a lot of our work, while it's tech and it's behind laptops and all of that, it has an impact on our built environment, right? And our work has been connected to some pretty big things that are happening right now around Chicago. So unfortunately, we're usually ground zero when something really bad happens and people are killed biking in Chicago or critically injured. And we've been just banging the drum on a lot of those tragedies, one of which is just how dangerous it is to get across Lakeshore Drive to get to and from the Lakefront Trail. And bicyclists have been killed attempting to do so. And one of the particular locations where a bicyclist has been killed, we installed a ghost bike, and that ghost bike gets crashed into repeatedly so often that we've had to replace it about 4 times, and each one of those ghost bikes has been crashed into multiple times. So raise your hand if you've been a part of those ghost bikes. Yeah, not fun. So right now the city is actually looking at burying Lakeshore Drive underground within the section by Buckingham Fountain. And we can't, tell you how awesome that would be. It's going to be an uphill battle, but our work has been identified as being connected to why that's actually getting support this time. There's a pilot program that's being introduced. They're working to reroute 911 parking-related phone calls from going to the police department and sending it directly to the Department of Finance. The Department of Finance and the folks involved with this were actually at our 8-year anniversary party, and they were able to share more about the pilot program, but we think it has a lot of good opportunities. The Department of Finance is much more active in actually keeping bike lanes clear than what the police department have been. And we have also been affiliated with some of the, just like pressure on the city to allow there to be a channel for bicyclists to report what's going on. And there is some work being done right now to allow constituents to actually report people obstructing bike lanes and for them to potentially get a ticket. It's getting pushback, obviously, from business owners. Business owners from our database, we can actually see that they are obstructing bike lanes themselves, so I can see why they're pushing back, because right now they have free parking. And then also our work has been connected with the automatic ticketing. There's a pilot program right now in the Loop in the Central Business District, and it has cameras on a few different vehicles, and those vehicles are able to automatically ticket for obstructing bike lanes, bus lanes, and so on. And we've also been in work with the Illinois Secretary of State, specifically for a lot of their efforts to reduce distracted driving. There's been some laws that have been introduced to help reduce a lot of the fatalities when it comes to the bicycling community, and just like make it safer on the streets, not even just for bicyclists, but also for drivers and pedestrians. All right, so for the folks that raised their hand earlier and said that they are unfamiliar with Lane Uprising, so Lane Uprising is a mobile app. It's used for people to report bike lane obstruction. So when somebody's obstructing a bike lane with a vehicle, or maybe it's just like unsafe, there could be like snow that isn't plowed. Raise your hand if you've seen snow that hasn't been plowed this winter in bike lanes. And debris, you name it, but bicyclists, they download this mobile app, they're able to take photos. You don't have to have a photo, but most people submit photos, again, because we've made it to where, like, if you do take a photo, our app will kind of fill in the form for you based off the information from that photo. And then once you upload and submit, all of that data gets aggregated together, and it goes into our live database every 5 minutes, and it goes to our maps that are aggregated across the US and Canada every 3 hours. So companies like Cisco and UPS and FedEx, they're using bike lanes as a way of having a free distribution channel, just for themselves. And they're not just doing it in Chicago, they're doing it across the US, they're doing it, everywhere. And by having one central database, we're able to get some really unique insights from that. So download the app. Okay, so, but the question is like, what happens with the data, right? And while, we have this list of things that we, let you know that's going to happen with it. So obviously, our data has been used to identify infrastructure improvements, so like where infrastructure is needed. It's also been used for a lot of advocacy to really pressure cities to build that. And it's also been opportunities for elected officials that want to build it to show that people actually want it and need it. It's actually proof, and it allows us to kind of cut through the devil's advocacy. We've used it to get laws passed. We've used it for education programs. There's been enforcement of hotspots. Like, I know that cities use our maps specifically to, dig in, redesign areas, identify where enforcement needs to be. And we can see repeat bike lane obstructors, and we can see the trends that go along with it. While we share some information publicly on the website, a lot of the information that we have behind the scenes, it's very vast. And our data, unfortunately, has been connected to fatalities, and with companies where, we gave them a heads up and they didn't do anything to change their behavior. So our data has been used in court cases where bicyclists have been injured or killed. And we're working on legal notices. We'll talk more about that later. And then just national statistics. So because we are collecting this in the US and Canada, we are able to look at the insights on a national, international level, which is very unique because everybody's kind of coming at this from like, oh, our own little city, our own, issues. But this is not just a one-off city issue. This is everywhere. All right. So this is the live database. As you submit a bike lane obstruction, it ends up in here every 5 minutes. It's also on the mobile app too, but it's more visual from the website. And then the map, you can see the map in 3 different views. So you can see the heat map, the pinpoint map, and the cluster map. You can filter it by different obstruction types. The calculations update every 3 hours as well. There's a little over 2,000 cities listed in our dropdown, but you can submit from anywhere in the US and Canada. And you can filter it by obstruction type, and then go find the the bike lane obstructions that you're looking for and see photos of those actual bike lane obstructions that took place at that location. And you can compare your stats to other cities. Like, you can jump to Chicago and then see like, okay, well, what does it look like in Lexington? Are these the same kind of statistics? Or you can find a city that's kind of comparable to yours. So far, we have collected over 100,000 bike lane obstructions, and while that is a large number, it's a minuscule amount of obstructions that are actually taking place. This is a signal more so. We like to say that our data being collected is almost more of a qualitative level. So we're able to get enough data that we can start to see some signals and then start digging into it to begin to investigate it a little bit further. For context, 110,000 bike lane obstructions is equivalent to about $17 to $50 million in unrealized fines. So like, this is like big, and these are conservative numbers because like if you're a construction site or like if you're a business or something like that, a lot of those bike lane obstructions, they're actually in those locations for months, if not years on end. And if they were to get fined for, the dangers that they were imposing, they would actually have to have a lawyer show up in court, and the fine would actually be set by the judge. So you're talking about like more into thousands of dollars. And as I mentioned, our data has been connected to a few fatalities. Specifically some companies that we tried to actually give them a heads up before a tragedy took place. In Chicago, a 3-year-old named Lily Shambrook was killed. She was biking with her parents one morning. There was a ComEd vehicle obstructing the bike lane on a greenway, a neighborhood greenway. and her parents entered into the traffic lane to get around the illegally parked vehicle. And as they did so, the mother and the daughter were clipped by a semi-truck, by Mondelez. So as they were, trying to get around the illegally obstructing vehicle, clipped, the daughter was killed instantly, the mother's still alive. But like 2 years prior to that, we had actually tweeted at ComEd. ComEd, for folks that are unfamiliar, is the utility provider in Chicago for electricity. And it's an entity that should know better, right? They know what's safe. Safety is typically a large part of utility companies' business practices. And they were really aggressive. The employees were really aggressive about, I can do whatever I want kind of, behavior. And, in the tweet, I actually mentioned like prevent ghost bikes, right? Like this is what causes ghost bikes. And they didn't change their behavior. But in said response, ComEd acknowledges receipt of the tweet. And in that, I let them know that it was not a unique instance. And because we have a database and we can see repeat bike lane obstructors, we showed them, a screenshot of, over 20 bike lane obstructions involving their specific company that had been reported to our database. And we never heard a response after that. And unfortunately, Lily Shambrook was killed. And by the time Lily was killed, they had been reported to our database about 60 times. So it doesn't feel good to, be in that position, right? Like I'm the one that has to go on the news and, kind of represent these like really horrible moments in time. And while it's great that we have the data and we can help and, try to help support the families during those times, it doesn't fix anything, right? It doesn't bring, the victims back. And, but we do have data to signal that something is wrong and something needs to be addressed. And, what we're trying to do right now is try and chip away at that and try to get ahead of those tragedies before they happen. So what we're doing here with Uprise is our sister site. So we have Bike Lane Uprising and we have Uprise. And the goal of Uprise is it's really supposed to be like a transportation aggregation. So really big data. But it's like, how do we, the same way that we're for bicyclists with Bike Lane Uprising, like we looked, taste and smell like bicyclists. We have to do that for Uprise too. Like we have to look and, emulate companies on the Uprise side of things, because like, the reality is like a logo with a fist in it isn't probably going to get us through the HR door, right? But we need to be palatable to the corporation side. And that's where we're skinning everything for Uprise and for corporations, but doing it in a way that is very symbiotic to what the biking community would need. And we have massive amounts of data, billions of data points, so much data that half of the time we're just trying to figure out where the end of the data is, right? We have, almost 3 million company profiles, if not more, I think by now, and like 74 inspection reports. And within those reports, there's a ton of data, violations. There's, almost 200,000, violations. There's a ton of rich data within those data sets. And the idea is, what if we could make this program, this platform to allow companies' fleet risk managers to have better insights into what's going on? Like, how do we let somebody that's probably juggling 4 to 5 different roles within their company, how do we allow them to really quickly see what's going on? What are the safety hazards? How do they kind of figure out where their, gaps are, and how do they address them, right? So kind of like, how like mint.com made it really easy for people to really see a complete picture. Even if you weren't really into investing, you could like very quickly see like, I gotta stop spending money at this one place, It's like the same thing for this. And, what if we could actually, instead of just, coming at them as like a, hey, this is a problem, like what if they could solve this problem and also reduce their insurance costs because of it? right? So like, how do we do this in a very like what's in it for them approach? So like not just the stick, but like really bring the carrots, right? And then what if, you know, safety could be their differentiator, right? So if we can show them their reports of how they're doing, what if they could also see how they compare to their competitors, right? And what if they're helping us move the needle on, you know, the bidding process from, okay, we're fastest, we're cheapest, to, no, we're the safest and we're who you want in your city centers, right? Because this other company is not who you want in your city centers because they have some problems. Look at their driving history, right? And as of right now, safety is not a part of the contract bidding process, especially in Chicago, for a fact. It's just not a part of it. And we're going to dig into the City of Chicago business contracts as well. All right, so we're going to back up just to make sure everybody's on the same page because it's a little confusing with Bike Lane Uprising, Uprise, you name it. Okay, so we have Bicyclist, some of you in the room. You report data to Bike Lane Uprising. We have other data sets that are available. We stitch it together in this thing called Uprise. And then the idea is that, you know, we'd be able to have like reports and audits and, you know, a software system for fleet risk managers, you know, maybe lawyers, reporters, you name it, you know, city employees, and be able to like do things to improve the situation. And since the last time we were here, we mentioned that we had an idea to build a training program and target fleet drivers. So one of the things from Bike Lane Uprising that I learned is that there are a lot of drivers on the road that have absolutely no idea what the rules, what the laws are when it comes to bike lanes, best practices, you name it. And they're just kind of trying to do their best, right? Some maybe not so, but for the most part, like, you know, no driver's really like going out and be like, I hope I, you know, run over a bicyclist today. But like the reality is, if you don't know, and if you're not set up for success, you know, you're set up for failure, right? And if you don't know where you're parking and where you're doing your deliveries that day, then you're in the moment probably just going to pick whatever is easiest, most convenient, and that's not safe. So we actually did it. We created a training program. We built it alongside a company that had been reported to our database for obstructing bike lanes. And this photo got an incredible amount of attention online, so much so that I was kind of taken back by how just like emotional and visceral people were in the comments about this. Yes, it's, you know, it's not a good bike lane obstruction. Obviously, it's a very dangerous area. You can see it's a very high trafficked area with very large semis going by. And it's a curb protected bike lane, but it was very odd just how much it exploded online. Did anyone see this photo originally? Yeah? Okay. So the company, you know, we followed up with them, and I shared with them that we had this idea for a training program, and that, you know, if they were game, that we'd love for them to go through it. But I was very open with the fact that we had absolutely nothing built. So they were game. We built it alongside of them. The course was in person at their office. They allowed us to survey their employees and really get to know like what are the things that they wanted to know. It's about 3.5, 4 hours each course. We ran 2 sessions at their office, and it went through what are the common crash types. What is the infrastructure? What are ways that they can kind of anticipate bicyclist movements? Because there's some stuff that like they just had no idea. And then, you know, they even asked if we would review their vehicles, right? So there were vehicles that they were a little more worried about, and we reviewed them with fleet safety managers and gave them feedback on, you know, what they were doing well, what were other opportunities that they could retrofit their vehicles on. And we reviewed their bike lane obstructions, like all of them. And our volunteers were kind of worried. They're like, are you sure you want to be in a very small, closed off room and, you know, kind of go through these? And I was like, yeah, I think it'll be good. And it was explosive. I wish you guys could have heard just the energy, because like by that time they knew what they had done right? They knew why it was dangerous. We shared with them like what adds to risk, what takes away risk. And we went through each and every bike lane obstruction. We shared, the photos that we had, all the data. We showed where they were parked, where they could have been parked instead, and this had an impact on them. And this guy in particular, there were 2 sessions. And the first session, this guy was the furthest away from me in the room. He was slumped in his chair, and he was like this. And if I said something, he was always kind of like trying to nitpick and pull apart whatever I had to say. And if I said another thing, he would do it again. And if I said one thing, he said, well, what about this really unique, very obscure other potential solution or, scenario? And I was like, listen, I can teach you how to, add risk. I can teach you how to take away risk. But at the end of the day, your situation is always going to change. And you're going to have to figure out what is legal, what is not legal, and how much risk you're willing to take on for you and your company. And for the second class in the afternoon, he actually attended that one as well. And he sat right next to me, and he was telling everyone they needed to be quiet because it was really good information and they needed to pay attention. So that is my net promoter score. But yeah, I mean, we didn't just try to browbeat. We tried to think like, well, if we were fleet risk managers, what would be things that we would need to know, right? Like, how do we share ways that they can pre-plan? Bicyclists pre-plan their routes in an absolutely insane amount of time. You street view, you do this, you do that. And it's like, if we shared like, okay, you guys can create maps of like where your job sites are, where the best, parking spots are, where good bathrooms are, where lunch spots are with good parking, like all of that. And you guys can crowdsource your own things. Okay, so on for the main part of the presentation. This has been a making over many, many years. We've made some awesome progress over the last year and a half, specifically for the folks that introduced themselves earlier. And really the goal of this audit, as I mentioned, is to examine predictive patterns so that, we can identify the carriers most at risk and try to find opportunities to prevent those tragedies from occurring again. Okay, so into this, it's like, well, what can we see from the crashes? Where do they take place? What contractors and carriers have connections with the city? Like, what are our opportunities to actually start addressing this? And, which ones have been reported to Lane Uprising too, right? Like, what's that connection? So a couple of things to point out. Not all companies have a United States Department of Transportation number, USDOT number, okay? So you have to be a certain type of demographic. Now, a lot of companies are going to try their best to not get one of those numbers. So, if you're over a certain weight limit, if you're going over state borders, if you're, doing hazardous materials, if you're over a certain amount of people in your vehicles. But not all companies have a USDOT number. So when we're talking about these numbers, you have to think that we sliced it down to only companies registered, physically located with the United States Department of Transportation, physically located in Illinois, okay? And again, not all companies are within that. And then also, data isn't always recorded accurately. I'm sure a lot of you guys know that. We've done our best to, wrangle it and wrangle it. There can be lag times with data. So some of the stuff that you'll see is like, the latest data points, maybe there's delays, maybe there's not. And then, carriers work to try and get past the legalities of all of this. So they try not to get a USDOT number. And then also some companies use a network of USDOT numbers and parent companies and all of that to look like multiple companies so that they don't carry all that risk themselves. And then some carriers will ditch a USDOT number when they've had issues and get a new one that's better for insurance rates. So these are all crazy things that I've learned over it. And then some carriers have just shut down. All right. So Illinois carrier crash stats. So of the subset of companies physically located in Illinois and registered with the United States Department of Transportation, it's a little over 55,000 carriers. And then these are the crashes since 2000. These are all crashes, not just bicyclists, but all crashes. So you can see things aren't good. And then these are the fatal crashes. Also not good. And you got to think, like, I mean, I come from the design world, specifically industrial design, and going to the auto shows and seeing all the technology and all the doodads in vehicles. Like, we can do all of these things in vehicles, but we can't keep them from killing people. And then this is breaking it down by, user type. So you have no bicyclist or pedestrian involved in the crash, and these are the fatal crashes. And then you have pedestrians in the purplish, and then involving the bicyclist down below. Now, this is that just in a pie chart, right? So you can understand just the scale of it all. So you have non-bike or ped, pretty much 99.1%, right? And then you have bicyclists and pedestrians. So while bicyclists and pedestrians only make up a small percentage, they're making up a much larger proportionate amount of the fatalities. So if a bicyclist or a pedestrian is getting hit, the likelihood of them getting killed is pretty high. So while the line chart had it way down here at the bottom, it has a much larger impact with how often it's happening. And then also just the amount of people that are like starting to bike more, and it's catching on and it's spreading to new places and places that aren't used to seeing bicyclists around. That can have an impact as well. So crashes involving bicyclists and pedestrians, just getting like a little closer, look at that line graph so you can start to see some of it. Obviously you can see where 2020 came in, and then when you look at it with fatal crashes, there's some variation kind of year over year. I don't know if that's just, some variation within, what happened that year, or if there is a lag in some of the data reporting, time will tell. And then we looked at, okay, of these crashes, where did they physically take place? So we have, carriers that are registered in Illinois. Where are they getting in these crashes with bicyclists, like physically? And then as we saw it, it was like, okay, that kind of looks like the highway and junction points in the highway. And it was interesting once we added the highways in, it like pretty much lined up. And then, carriers, while they're located, their headquarters or where their office with the United States Department of Transportation is located, it's not the only place that they drive to. They're driving everywhere. Transportation is oftentimes a part of their business model. And this is where they're crashing into bicyclists on a national level. So you can see California, Florida, and obviously Illinois is the highest because they're physically located here. And then you can also see kind of the breakdown of where those fatalities are. Now, again, these are only Illinois-based companies. So as we start to look, when we do this report for, a national level, it's going to be interesting to see what happens as we layer in all of that. So of the companies reported, with USDOT numbers, there have been 238 crashes with bicyclists since 1994. I kind of think some of the older stuff is probably a little underreported, stuff like that. But then also biking grew, and but like when you get a new form, it takes a while to like train everybody, and there's always going to be variations of like what police officers and folks are gonna fill out. So of those 238 crashes that are listed, there were 36 fatalities, and then of those 238 crashes, there were actually only 134 carriers, or 154 carriers. So some of those carriers are involved in more than one crash. And there were 33 carriers involved in 36 fatalities, meaning carriers were involved in more than one fatality, 2 companies. And a lot of this data audit came to be because we were actually so rosy-eyed and, forward-thinking. We're like, okay, well, now that we built this training program, we should invite companies to take it and let them know that we built this and how it could help them. And we're like, well, how do we reach out to companies? And it's like, well, we have Uprise, so we have all of this data, and we could use it kind of like a, contact relationship management tool, like a CRM. And it's like, okay, well, we have email addresses and we have, their driving history. And it's like, well, we could identify like which companies are located in Illinois, because like that's where a lot of the education portion of it was built initially. And then it's like, okay, well, maybe we'll identify which companies have been in crashes, and that's who would probably get the most impact out of this training, right? And as we just started to dig into it, just on the notion of like, oh, we'll just invite people to this training, we started to see some really, really awful stats. And it caused me to just throw on the brakes, and I was like, whoa, like this is not good. So as an example, Durham School Services, they were involved in 18 crashes and 3 fatalities. And some of those crashes took place just days apart. Like it was incredibly eerie to just see all of this data. It was like, nothing had been learned within that, entity. And like, think about it. Think about how many people have been sending their kids to school and they're on a school bus or something, and now they just witnessed their, school bus involved in something like that. And what I also learned from Durham School Services is their registered agent was listed on a lot of other companies too. And when I started to look at registered agents of a lot of companies, that's where I could start to see that something, weird was kind of taking place. There were 151 registered agents amongst all 238 of those crashes. So while of the 154 carriers listed, so there's definitely a network of parent companies going on. And 10% of all of the bike crashes and 3 fatalities shared the same exact person as their registered agent. So it's like, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to dig into this data and try to think about like, well, what are opportunities for us to start reaching out to people, and how do we start to find ways to make this better? It's like, and when you think about bike safety and, all of the fatalities and crashes and all of that, it seems so unsolvable. But then you see stuff like this and you're like, one person could have such an impact on the safety of so many people. All right, so on to insurance coverage. Because as we were in there, it's like, well, who's insuring these companies, and also you think unsolvable, right? You think all of, 55,000 carriers, how many insurance carriers are there? Well, in Illinois, they have a little over maybe 900. But of the companies that were involved in crashes, there's only 58 companies. So it's like, maybe insurance carriers are an opportunity for us to leverage into the conversation of safety. And then when you talk about fatalities, there were only 19 companies involved. So it's like, 1,000 insurance companies seems kind of difficult to reach out to, especially when you think about this on a, scale it to a national level. But 19 seems pretty doable. So then we're like, I wonder of these companies, which ones have contracts with the city of Chicago? So one of the programs that, I think had an awesome impact was the city of Chicago making requirements for vendors to modify their vehicles to make them safer. So if they had a contract with the city of Chicago, if they were over a certain amount, then the city, had these programs in place to encourage them to modify their vehicles to make it safer as they were, around areas with bicyclists and pedestrians. And I feel like there's an opportunity because 31 carriers involved with crashes with bicyclists have contracts with the city of Chicago or have had direct contracts. Now, that's not a subcontractor, a sub-subcontractor. That's like they won the actual main contract. And most, when you start to look at city contracts, like there's just like a whole layer of subcontractors. It's like most companies are not going to be listed. But these are like the ones that own the contract. And those carriers have had a little over 1,000 contracts themselves. So each one of those contracts is an opportunity to kind of raise those safety conversations. And that's $2.5 billion. So we're not talking about just like a little amount of money to where like, oh, this is just going to be like a nickel and dime type of thing to where it's not going to be, useful to them. Like these are contracts to where like they can afford to train their employees to drive safe in our city centers, right? And around our communities. And 4 carriers involved in fatal crashes with bicyclists have direct contracts with the city of Chicago. And they've been awarded 188 contracts for over $500,000. So again, they could use some of that to train their drivers. All right, so on to Lane Uprising. So of these companies involved with these crashes, how many have actually been reported to Lane Uprising? So when I say, hey, it's unsafe to obstruct bike lanes, this is what I mean. So this audit is not done, but over half of them were reported to Lane Uprising. Now, think about this, like we're a national thing, right? So some of the carriers were actually reported in other states. So they weren't necessarily reported in Illinois, they were reported in another state. So again, that's another one of those, correlations to where like we're able to have a much larger voice and, chip away at this. And a couple of things. This audit is not complete, meaning there's still a lot of other things and data sets that we can start going through, but we're already over 50%, and it's just going to grow. It's going to grow as we continue to really examine the bike lane obstructions that we have, the 110,000 bike lane obstructions, and it's going to grow as people submit data. And we're also making it easier to link obstructions and company identifiers. So you're going to see some modifications to the mobile app coming out too. And that's why those modifications are going to come, is to directly link to the company themselves. So of the crashes, specifically the fatalities, 47% have been reported to Lane Uprising. So when we say it is unsafe and obstructing bike lanes has a correlation, there's obviously some correlation going on there. And again, audit not complete. All right, so carrier-specific stats. Everything that we're doing on a national level, we can actually get really into the data, company-specific level data. This is a national thing, but take a look at this. Keep in mind that this is, just the last 10 years, but also companies like UPS, FedEx, Cisco, all those, they have just like a potpourri of USDOT numbers. This is just one of their USDOT numbers. So, they're in 1,000 to 1,600, crashes annually every year. And they're involved with about 25 to 48 fatalities every single year. And this is how it falls when, you start looking at just like the pedestrians and the bicyclists, 1 to 9 fatal per year. And then as far as, just like seeing it kind of mapped out, you can kind of see the correlation. There is a dip here. I'm hopeful that that's, good news for everybody, that something's changing. And when you start to look at, of the violations that they have, you can start to see like what's maybe contributing to, some of those fatalities, crashes. Speeding is, popping up multiple, points. So dangerous driving is the highest, but there's multiple categories listed for speeding because it's like, okay, if you're this amount over, if you're this amount over, this is them going 15 miles an hour over the speed limit. And a lot of their vehicles are really big. And you can start to see that the fatalities don't actually scale to the amount of crashes. So you can see by hour a day crashes, but fatalities are just kind of all over the map. And you can see the month of the year, for crashes, but the fatalities, kind of don't really map directly to it. But again, we can do that for all the companies, not just UPS. And as we stitch all this data together, as we're building this out, this is something that we're going to be able to do everywhere. So on-deck projects, replicate the Illinois carrier audit nationally, grow the fleet driver training program, and legal notices. So this is one of the things that I think is going to be one of our most impactful points. So bicyclists, they submit Lane Uprising data. We send legal notices potentially. The goal is for us to start sending legal notices out systematically to companies that have been reported to Lane Uprising directly to the company. So send it directly to their fleet risk manager. And then from there, we have 2 preferred paths that we would like to take place. One path is that the company receives said legal notice, they change their behavior, we never hear from them, right? They're just done, conversation over, perfect. The other, preferred path is like, okay, they don't really know what they're supposed to do, they want to figure it out, we have the training available, and then they change their behavior, also great. The option that we don't recommend is that they continue to obstruct bike lanes, they don't do anything to, change the behavior in their company. Crash or fatality with a bicyclist takes place. Then we have that data and that legal notice available. It's now available for insurance companies, lawyers, news reporters. Bad faith is established. This is not just a term, this is like a legal term, meaning if you can establish that the company was operating in bad faith, then it means that the payout cap limits are removed on those court cases, and you can sue in more categories for larger amounts of money, and then the size of the judgments increase. And hopefully when size of judgments start increasing, then that scares people to change their behavior. So if you kind of think about this and you kind of squint, it's a little bit of a negative positive feedback loop. So hopefully we can kind of scare people into doing the right thing before the thing happens. That's kind of the goal. And if you want to support our work, you can submit bike lane obstructions. We have a merch store. You can become a supporter financially of our work. You can volunteer, and you can just help spread the word. Thank you. Any questions?